Armageddon is a hive world in the Segmentum Solar that has been the scene of 3 major wars in the history of the Imperium of Man. Each war was a colossal struggle that involved millions of combatants, countless casualties, and immense destruction. Each war also had a different enemy that threatened to overrun the planet, and its vital resources and dark secrets. In the year 444, M41, the Hive World of Armageddon faced its greatest threat: the invasion of the demon primarch Angron, the Lord of the World Eaters. Angron had come to unleash his wrath upon the Imperium and to claim Armageddon as his own domain. He brought with him legions of chaos, demons and traitors who sought to drown the planet in blood and fire. The defenders of Armageddon, led by the Armageddon Steel Legion, fought valiantly against the overwhelming odds, but they were no match for Angron's fury. The planet was plunged into a nightmare of war and horror as the forces of chaos ravaged its cities and industries. The Imperium sent reinforcements to aid Armageddon, including 2 Space Marine chapters, the Space Wolves and the Grey Knights. These chapters had a personal history with Angron and a special mission to stop him. They launched a daring assault on Angron's headquarters, where they faced his elite warriors and demons. The battle was fierce and bloody as the fate of Armageddon and the Imperium hung in the balance. The First War for Armageddon was a cataclysmic conflict that took place in the year 444, M41 on the Hive World of Armageddon, located in the Segmentum Solar. It was a war between the forces of the Imperium of Man and the Legions of Chaos, led by the demon Primarch Angron, the former Lord of the World Eaters Traitor Legion. The war was a result of Angron's long-term plan to reunite his scattered war bands and launch a massive invasion into the heart of the Imperium, using a derelict space hull as a means of transport through the warp. The war was also a test of faith and loyalty for the defenders of Armageddon, who faced not only the horrors of chaos, but also the ruthless measures of the Inquisition to preserve the secrecy of the threat. The war began with a series of uprisings and rebellions by chaos cultists, who had been secretly infiltrating and corrupting the population of Armageddon for decades. These cultists, devoted to the bloodthirsty god Khorne, sought to weaken the planetary defenses and prepare the way for Angron's arrival. They were aided by mutants, traitors, and demons who emerged from hidden portals and warp rifts across the planet. The loyalist forces of Armageddon, led by Governor-General Hermann von Straub, were caught off guard by the sudden and widespread attacks and struggled to contain the chaos. The situation worsened when Angron himself emerged from the warp, along with 4 companies of his World Eaters and 2 traitor Titan legions. The demon Primarch landed on the continent of Armageddon Prime, where he unleashed his fury on the Hive cities and industrial complexes. He was opposed by the Armageddon Steel Legion, a renowned Imperial Guard regiment that specialized in urban warfare. The Steel Legion fought bravely against overwhelming odds, but could not stop Angron's rampage. The Imperium responded by sending reinforcements to Armageddon, including 2 entire Space Marine chapters, the Space Wolves and the Grey Knights. The Space Wolves were one of the original legions that fought alongside Angron during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, and had a personal grudge against their fallen brother. The Grey Knights were a secretive and elite chapter that specialized in combating demonic threats and had the power to banish Angron back to the warp. The arrival of these chapters turned the tide of the war as they launched a series of counterattacks against Angron's forces. The decisive battle took place at the Hive city of Hellsreach, where Angron had made his headquarters. The Space Wolves and the Grey Knights assaulted the city with their full strength, supported by elements of the Steel Legion and several loyalist Titan legions. They faced fierce resistance from Angron's Chosen, his elite World Eaters company, as well as hordes of demons and cultists. The battle raged for days until finally Angron himself emerged from his palace to face his enemies. Angron was confronted by Logan Grimnar, the Great Wolf of the Space Wolves, and Taramar Aurelian, the brother captain of the Grey Knights. The 3 warriors engaged in a titanic duel that shook the city. Grimnar fought with his legendary axe Morkai, while Aurelian wielded his nemesis force Halberd. Angron wielded his twin chain axes Gorefather and Gorechild, which he had used since his days as a gladiator on his homeworld of Nuceria. The battle was fierce and bloody, as each combatant inflicted grievous wounds on their opponents. However, Angron proved to be too powerful for even Grimnar and Aurelian to match, as he overpowered them with his demonic strength and fury. As Angron was about to deliver the final blow to his foes, he was suddenly struck by a blast of psychic energy that came from Aurelian's halberd. The Grey Knight had activated a hidden device within his weapon, which contained a fragment of Angron's own gene seed. This device created a resonance with Angron's corrupted essence, weakening his connection to the warp and making him vulnerable to banishment. Aurelian then channeled his psychic power through his halberd, creating a vortex that sucked Angron into it. With a final roar of rage and pain, Angron disappeared into the warp along with his chain axes. The banishment of Angron was a major victory for the Imperium, as it effectively ended the First War for Armageddon. Without their leader, Angron's forces quickly collapsed and retreated back to their space hulk. The Loyalist forces pursued them and destroyed their vessel with orbital bombardment, ensuring that none would escape. The planet was saved from chaos domination, but at a terrible cost. The aftermath of the war was a dark and tragic chapter in Armageddon's history. The Inquisition, led by Inquisitor Horst, decided that the knowledge of chaos and its demonic minions was too dangerous to be allowed to spread among the general populace. They ordered that all those who had fought on the planet, except for the Space Marines, were to be rounded up, sterilized, and placed in work camps, where they would labor until they died out. This was a cruel and unjust fate for the brave defenders of Armageddon, who had sacrificed so much to protect their world. The Space Wolves were outraged by this decision and refused to comply. They argued that the people of Armageddon deserved to be honored and rewarded for their courage and loyalty, not punished and enslaved. They also claimed that the Inquisition had no authority over them, as they answered only to the Emperor himself. The Inquisition, however, insisted that their actions were necessary and justified, and that the Space Wolves were interfering with their sacred duty. A bitter conflict ensued between the two factions, which came to be known as the Months of Shame. The Space Wolves fought against the Inquisition's forces, as well as their allies from other Space Marine chapters, such as the Red Hunters and the Dark Angels. The conflict lasted for several months, until finally a truce was brokered by the intervention of the High Lords of Terror. The Space Wolves were allowed to leave Armageddon with their honor intact, but they had to swear an oath of silence about the war and its secrets. The Inquisition continued with their purge of Armageddon's population, but they also faced a backlash from other Imperial authorities who questioned their methods and motives. The First War for Armageddon was a war that changed the fate of a world and left a lasting impact on the Imperium. It was a war that tested the limits of courage and faith, as well as cruelty and secrecy. It was a war that revealed the true nature of chaos and the price of fighting it. It was a war that few remember and many wish to forget. Now we go on to the Second War for Armageddon. Strap in. What if you had to fight a war against an enemy that was smarter, stronger, and more numerous than you? An enemy that could turn your world into a hellish wasteland in a matter of days. An enemy that had only one goal: to kill you and everything you love. That was the nightmare that faced the defenders of Armageddon, a vital planet in the Imperium of Man, when they faced the invasion of the Ork war boss Ghazghkull Thraka. The Second War for Armageddon was one of the most brutal and epic wars in the history of Warhammer 40K. It was a war that tested the courage, faith, and resilience of the Imperials, as well as the cunning, ferocity, and ambition of the Orks. It was a war that changed the fate of Armageddon and the Imperium forever. The Second War for Armageddon was one of the most devastating conflicts in the history of the Imperium of Man. It pitted the might of the Ork war boss Ghazghkull Uruk Thraka against the defenders of the Hive World of Armageddon, led by the legendary commissar Sebastian Yarrick. The war lasted for 2 years, from 941 M41 to 943 M41, and resulted in massive casualties on both sides, as well as the near destruction of Armageddon's global infrastructure. Here is a brief overview of the main events and outcomes of this epic war. The war began when Ghazghkull Thraka, who had risen to power after being shot in the head and receiving a bionic implant that enhanced his intelligence and charisma, launched a massive Ork WAAAGH from his base on the planet of Uruk. He had gathered 5 Ork tribes under his banner and had amassed a huge fleet of space hulks and rocks. His target was Armageddon, a strategically important world that produced vast amounts of munitions and material for the Imperium. He saw it as a worthy challenge for his Orks and a stepping stone to his ultimate goal of conquering Terra itself. The Imperial Planetary Governor of Armageddon, Overlord Hermann von Straub, was completely unprepared for the Ork invasion. He had ignored the warnings of his advisors and the Imperial Navy, and had neglected to fortify the planet's defenses. He also refused to cooperate with the other Imperial commanders who arrived to aid him, such as Commissar Uruk, Lord Commander Dante of the Blood Angels Chapter, Chapter Master Marneus Calgar of the Ultramarines Chapter, and Chapter Master Tushan of the Salamanders Chapter. His arrogance and incompetence would cost him dearly. The Orks landed on Armageddon in 3 main waves. The first wave consisted of hundreds of rocks that crashed into the planet's surface, creating massive craters and releasing thousands of Orks. The second wave was composed of space hulks that deployed Ork fighters and bombers that attacked the planet's orbital defenses and airfields. The third wave was led by Ghazghkull himself, who boarded a massive space hulk called Gork's Grin and rammed it into Hive Reach, one of the largest and most populous hives on Armageddon. The war quickly turned into a brutal siege as the Orks besieged the hives and industrial complexes that dotted the planet. The Imperial forces fought valiantly to hold them back, but were outnumbered and outgunned by the Ork horde. The Orks also used their crude but effective technology to create weapons of mass destruction, such as gargants, squiggets, lifter-droppers, shock attack guns, and more. The Imperials countered with their own heavy weaponry, such as Titans, Basilisks, Baneblades, Thunderhawks, and more. The war reached its climax when Ghazghkull launched his final assault on Hive Tempestora, where Overlord von Straub had retreated with his loyal forces. Ghazghkull had amassed his largest gargant ever, called Gork's Maw, and planned to use it to breach the Hive's walls and crush its defenders. However, he was met with fierce resistance from Commissar Uruk, who had rallied the remaining Imperial forces to make a last stand. Uruk had also managed to capture an Ork weird boy named Zapnoggin, who had psychic abilities that could disrupt Ghazghkull's bionic implant. Uruk used Zapnoggin to send a psychic message to Ghazghkull, challenging him to a personal duel. Ghazghkull accepted the challenge, seeing it as an opportunity to prove his superiority over Uruk. He left Gork's Maw in the hands of his second-in-command, Makari, and boarded a fighter-bomber to fly to Hive Tempestora. There he faced Uruk in a fierce combat that lasted for hours. Both combatants inflicted grievous wounds on each other, but neither could gain the upper hand. Eventually, Ghazghkull managed to rip off Uruk's power claw arm and threw him off a building. He then declared himself the victor and returned to his fighter-bomber. However, Uruk was not dead. He had survived the fall thanks to his bionic eye and his indomitable will. He crawled back to his command post and contacted Lord Commander Dante via Voxcaster. He informed him that Ghazghkull had left Gork's Maw unguarded and urged him to launch an all-out attack on it before it reached Hive Tempestora. Dante heeded Uruk's advice and mobilized his Blood Angels and their allies to strike at Gork's Maw. They faced heavy opposition from the Orks, but managed to reach the Gargant and plant melter bombs on its legs and belly. The bombs detonated, causing Gork's Maw to collapse and explode, killing Makari and thousands of Orks. The explosion also triggered a chain reaction that destroyed many of the other Ork Gargants and vehicles nearby. The destruction of Gork's Maw was a turning point in the war. The Orks lost their momentum and morale, and began to retreat. The Imperials pursued them relentlessly, slaughtering them by the thousands. Ghazghkull realized that he had lost the war, and decided to flee the planet with his remaining forces. He boarded Gork's Grin, which had been repaired by his mech boys, and blasted off into space. However, he was not able to escape unscathed. As he left the planet's atmosphere, he was intercepted by a squadron of Imperial Navy vessels, led by Admiral Parol. They opened fire on Gork's Grin, damaging it severely. Ghazghkull barely managed to activate his warp engines and jump into the Immaterium, leaving behind a trail of debris and corpses. The Second War for Armageddon was over. The Imperium had won, but at a terrible cost. Hundreds of thousands of Imperial soldiers and civilians had died or been wounded, and Armageddon's global infrastructure had been devastated. The planet would take decades to recover from the war, and would require constant vigilance against the Orks who still lurked in its wastelands and jungles. Commissar Uruk was hailed as a hero by the Imperium and was granted full authority over Armageddon by the High Lords of Terror. He vowed to rebuild the planet and prepare it for any future threats. He also swore to hunt down Ghazghkull and finish him off once and for all. The Second War for Armageddon was one of the most epic wars in the history of Warhammer 40K. It showcased the ferocity and cunning of the Orks, as well as the courage and determination of the Imperials. It also introduced some of the most iconic characters and events in the Warhammer 40K lore, such as Ghazghkull Thraka, Commissar Uruk, Gorksmore, Zapnogin, and more. It was a war that shaped the fate of Armageddon and the Imperium for years to come. Now we go straight to the third world for Armageddon. Let's have a look at what happened next. The fate of a world hangs in the balance, as the largest Ork invasion ever seen clashes with the might of the Imperium of Man. But they are not alone, as other forces join the fray, seeking to exploit the chaos and destruction. This is the story of the Third War for Armageddon, a war that lasted for over a decade and changed the galaxy forever. The Third War for Armageddon was one of the most devastating conflicts in the history of the Imperium of Man. It pitted the might of the largest Ork WAAAGH ever seen, led by the infamous Warlord Ghazghkull Uruk Thraka, against the defenders of the Hive World of Armageddon, a vital industrial planet that supplied much of the Segmentum Solar with weapons and munitions. The war lasted for over a decade, from 998 M41 to the present day, and involved massive casualties on both sides, as well as the intervention of other factions such as Chaos and Necrons. This is the story of how the Third War for Armageddon began, how it unfolded, and what its consequences are for the future of the Imperium and the galaxy, the origins of the Third War. The Third War for Armageddon was not the first time that Ghazghkull Thraka had set his sights on the planet. In 941, M41, he led his first war against Armageddon, hoping to conquer it and use its resources to build an even bigger army. However, he was met with fierce resistance from the Imperial forces, led by Commissar Sebastian Uruk, a veteran officer who became Ghazghkull's nemesis and obsession. The First War for Armageddon ended in a stalemate, with Ghazghkull escaping into the warp after a failed attempt to assassinate Uruk. Ghazghkull did not give up on his ambition to take Armageddon. He spent the next 57 years roaming the galaxy, raiding and pillaging countless worlds, and gathering more followers and allies. He also underwent several bionic enhancements, and claimed to receive visions from Gork and Mork, the Ork gods of war. He became convinced that he was destined to lead the greatest WAAAGH ever seen, and that Armageddon was the key to his ultimate victory.
In 998, M41, Ghazghkull returned to Armageddon with a massive fleet of Ork ships, estimated to number in the millions. He launched a surprise attack on the planet's orbital defenses, catching them off guard and overwhelming them with sheer numbers. He then proceeded to unleash a massive orbital bombardment on the planet's surface, targeting its major cities and industrial zones. The bombardment lasted for 3 days and nights, causing widespread devastation and panic among the Imperial population. The battle for Armageddon. The Imperial forces on Armageddon were caught unprepared by Ghazghkull's attack. The planet's governor, Hermann von Straub, was a corrupt and incompetent leader who had neglected the planet's defenses and ignored the warnings of Uruk, who had returned to Armageddon after hearing rumors of Ghazghkull's return. Von Straub refused to mobilize his troops or call for reinforcements from nearby systems, hoping that Ghazghkull would spare him if he surrendered. However, not all of Armageddon's defenders were willing to give up without a fight. Uruk took command of a ragtag force of loyal Imperial Guard regiments, local militia units, PDF forces, and civilian volunteers. He organized a desperate defense of Hive Hellsreach, one of the largest and most important cities on Armageddon. He also sent out a distress signal to any nearby Imperial forces that could aid him. The signal was received by several Space Marine chapters that were in the vicinity of Armageddon. Among them were the Salamanders, led by Chapter Master Tushan, the Black Templars, led by High Marshal Helbrecht, and the Blood Angels, led by Captain Erasmus Tycho. These chapters quickly mobilized their forces and made their way to Armageddon, hoping to stem the tide of Orks.
The Space Marines arrived just in time to join Yarrik's defense of Hive Reach. They fought bravely against overwhelming odds, holding back wave after wave of Orks. They also launched counterattacks against Ork positions, inflicting heavy casualties on their enemies. However, they soon realized that Ghazghkull had not committed his full strength yet. He was waiting for something. That something turned out to be a massive asteroid that Ghazghkull had secretly diverted from its orbit and aimed at Armageddon. The asteroid was packed with explosives and Orks, who intended to use it as a giant drop pod. The asteroid crashed into Armageddon's south pole, creating a huge explosion that shook the entire planet. The impact also unleashed thousands of Orks onto the surface, who quickly spread out and attacked any Imperial settlements they could find. The asteroid strike was a devastating blow to the Imperial forces. It destroyed many of their bases and supply lines, as well as causing massive environmental damage. It also allowed Ghazghkull to launch his main assault on Hive Reach and other major cities. The Orks attacked with overwhelming numbers and ferocity, using a variety of weapons and vehicles, from crude axes and pistols to massive tanks and gargants. The Imperial forces were hard-pressed to hold their ground, and many of them fell to the Ork onslaught. However, the Imperium was not without reinforcements. As the war dragged on, more and more Imperial forces arrived to aid Armageddon's defenders. Among them were more Space Marine chapters, such as the Ultramarines, the Imperial Fists, the White Scars, and the Grey Knights. There were also several Titan legions, such as the Legio Ignatum, the Legio Metallica, and the Legio Crucius. There were also countless regiments of Imperial Guard from various worlds and sectors. These forces brought with them more firepower and manpower, as well as new tactics and strategies. The war became a brutal stalemate, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The battles raged on for years, across every terrain and climate on Armageddon. The planet became a hellish wasteland, scarred by fire and blood. The casualties mounted on both sides, reaching into the millions. Yet neither side showed any sign of giving up or surrendering. The other factions. The Third War for Armageddon was not only a conflict between the Imperium and the Orks. It also attracted the attention of other factions, who saw an opportunity to exploit the situation for their own ends. One of these factions was Chaos. The war had generated so much death and violence that it had drawn the attention of the Chaos gods, especially Khorne, the Blood God. Khorne sent his demonic legions to Armageddon, hoping to feast on the blood and skulls of the combatants. He also sent his most loyal servant, Angron, the demon primarch of the World Eaters Legion.
Angron had been banished from Armageddon during the First War when he had led a massive invasion of Chaos Space Marines and demons. He had been defeated by a combined force of Imperial forces and Eldar allies who had used an ancient artifact called the Talisman of Vol to create a warp rift that sucked Angron and his army into the Immaterium. However, Angron had not forgotten his defeat, and he sought revenge on Armageddon. Angron's return was heralded by a massive warp storm that engulfed Armageddon's south pole, where the asteroid had struck. The storm opened a portal to the warp, from which Angron and his demons emerged. They quickly attacked both Imperial and Ork forces, slaughtering anyone who stood in their way. Angron's goal was to reach Hive Reach, where he believed Yarrik was hiding. He wanted to kill Yarrik personally, as he blamed him for his previous defeat. However, Angron was not alone in his quest for vengeance. He was followed by another demon primarch, Magnus the Red, the Lord of Change of the Thousand Suns Legion. Magnus had also been banished from Armageddon during the First War when he had tried to use his sorcery to manipulate the Talisman of Vol. He had been thwarted by Yarrik and his allies, who had used a psychic device called the Eye of Iris to disrupt Magnus' spells. Magnus had also sworn revenge on Armageddon. Magnus' return was marked by a series of mysterious phenomena that plagued Armageddon's North Pole, where Hive Reach was located. These phenomena included strange lights in the sky, bizarre mutations among the wildlife, and psychic disturbances among the population. Magnus' goal was to find and destroy the Eye of Iris, which he believed was hidden somewhere in Hive Reach. He wanted to use his magic to unleash his full power on Armageddon. However, Magnus was not welcomed by his fellow Chaos servants. He was opposed by Khorne and his followers, who hated him for his reliance on sorcery and trickery. Khorne ordered Angron to kill Magnus before he could reach Hive Reach. Angron gladly accepted this challenge.
as he hated Magnus as much as Khorne did. Thus began a three-way war between Chaos factions on Armageddon. Khorne versus Tzeentch, versus Nurgle, versus Slaanesh, versus Undivided, versus Renegades, versus Heretics, versus Traitors versus Mutants versus Cultists versus Daemons versus Chaos Space Marines versus Daemon Primarchs. Another faction that joined the war was Necrons. The Necrons had been dormant on Armageddon for eons, hidden in an ancient pyramid that was buried deep beneath the surface. The pyramid was designated as Artifact XE-336 by Imperial explorers who had discovered it during an archaeological expedition before the war. The expedition had been unable to penetrate its defenses or unlock its secrets. The Necrons were awakened by Ghazghkull's asteroid. The Third War for Armageddon was a massive conflict between the Imperium of Man and the Orks, led by Warlord Ghazghkull Thraka. The war lasted for over a decade, from 998 AM41 to the present day, and involved massive casualties on both sides, as well as the intervention of other factions such as Chaos and Necrons. The outcome of the war is not clear-cut, as neither side was able to secure complete control over the contested world, and fighting is still ongoing across the planet. However, some sources suggest that the war ended in a marginal Imperial victory, as Ghazghkull chose to retreat off-world to launch a larger WAAAGH elsewhere, leaving behind large Ork armies that are still being fought by the Imperial forces. Commissar Sebastian Yarrick did not retire after the Third War for Armageddon. Instead, he joined a Black Templars crusade to hunt down Ghazghkull Uruk Thraka, who had escaped from the planet and launched a larger elsewhere. Yarrick was determined to finish his nemesis once and for all, and followed him across the galaxy. He fought in many battles against the Orks, earning the respect and admiration of the Space Marines. He also encountered other enemies, such as Chaos, Tyranids, and Necrons. He even faced Angron, the demon primarch of the World Eaters, and survived. Yarrick's fate is unknown, as he is still pursuing Ghazghkull to this day. He is considered one of the greatest heroes of the Imperium, and a legend among both humans and Orks. The wars for Armageddon were some of the most brutal and epic conflicts in the history of the Imperium of Man. They pitted the defenders of humanity against the relentless hordes of Orks, led by the infamous warlord Ghazghkull Uruk Thraka. They also involved the intervention of other factions, such as Chaos, Eldar, Necrons, and Tyranids, who sought to exploit the situation for their own ends. The wars for Armageddon were more than just wars. They were also stories of courage and heroism, of sacrifice and tragedy, of glory and horror. They were stories that shaped the lives of many individuals, such as Yarrick, Ghazghkull, Angron, Magnus, Tushan, Helbrecht, Tycho, Dante, Vulcan Hastan, Logan Grimnar, Kaldor Drago, Abaddon the Despoiler, Eldrad Ulthran, Imhotep the Stormlord, Hive Tyrant Behemoth, and many more. They were stories that influenced the fate of many worlds and sectors such as Cadia, Fenris, Prospero, Macragge, Bale, and more. That's all for this video, my friends. I hope you enjoyed it and had fun. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. Also, don't forget to hit the bell icon to get notified whenever I upload a new video. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I would love to hear from you and chat with you. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. I really appreciate it very much. Stay tuned for the next video, where I will talk about the Fourth War for Armageddon when it happens, and its implications for the Imperium of Man. Until then, stay safe, and have a great day, my friends, and as always, keep the light of the Emperor burning. Bye.